A report from Group 17 by Robert C. O'Brien, Chapter 12. Allie did not know how long she had been in the cage. That was because there were no real nights and days, no windows at all, and no way to see what was happening outdoors. When they turned the lights dim, she slept, most of the time at least. And when they turned them bright, when they were there, she stayed awake. She thought that must be daytime. Sometimes they brought her food, but she could not tell if it was breakfast, lunch, or dinner, since it was nearly always the same, bread or toast with butter, wrapped in a paper napkin. Once they brought her an apple, and once an orange, which she peeled with her teeth and fingers. The doctor now gave her drinking water at each meal in a kind of jar instead of a glass, a jar with straight white lines on the side and numbers written next to them. He always stayed and watched to make sure she drank it all. She did not go outside, but saw only the room her cage stood in, and no one except the doctor, the young animal keeper, and Victor. She liked Victor the best, and had found a way of making friends with him. She had discovered that the square openings in the wire wall of her cage were large enough so that if she pushed hard she could get her hand through, and most of her wrist as well, though it scratched a little. When she first did this, it was in the direction of Victor's cage, and he came over and started pressing his flat nose against the wire so hard she thought it must hurt. His eyes were dark brown and serious, his forehead furrowed and sad. When she pulled her hand back into the cage, he continued to stare, and then tried to push his own hand out in the same way. He could not, it was far too big, but he did put 2 fingers through. They were the longest fingers Allie had ever seen, and reached more than half the distance between the 2 cages, so that when she put her own hand out again, she found unexpectedly she was touching him. The first time she did this, he gave a sort of bark, snatched his fingers back, and leaped all the way to the far side of his cage, where he clung to the wall as if he were afraid. But 2 minutes later he was back, and this time when they touched, though he pulled his fingers away, he merely examined them as if her touch might have left a mark. Then he put his hand back and left his fingertips gently touching hers. It became something like a game. Each time one of them reached out, the other did too. Allie thought of it as holding fingers. Victor was getting to be her friend. She was glad of that because, although she continued to feel nice, she also felt at times lonely. Fergus ate lunch, ham sandwich, glass of beer, cup of coffee, then took his 3 bottles of water, set them in a briefcase along with a notebook and a ballpoint pen, and climbed into the State Department's car. He had donned a jacket, and in its pocket carried 2 letters of introduction and accreditation, one from Mr. Bales, one from Colonel Attenborough. Half an hour later he arrived at the huge white building where Mr. Bales worked. He entered as advised. Through Gate 5, a red and white barricade blocked the asphalt roadway leading in. A guard in gray uniform, blank of face, ostentatiously unarmed, stepped from a security box. He spoke not a word, but examined the letter from Mr. Bales, handed it back, returned to the sentry box, and pressed a button which raised the barricade. Mum's the word, called Fergus, and drove in. He parked his car, as advised, in Area D. 2 guards later he faced a receptionist in, as advised, room 2036. She wore a white coat and sat behind a counter. She had black hair, and she looked young, pretty, and intelligent. Behind her, an opaque glass wall blocked the rest of the room from view, but it had a familiar smell of a laboratory. The receptionist was expecting Fergus. She glanced at his letter from Mr. Bales, accepted his 3 little bottles, and affixed a paper tag to the neck of each. He asked, "Do you know when the report will be ready?" She stared at him, then said, "You're from outside. Does that make a difference?" "Not really, except if you weren't, you'd know I can't tell you that. I can tell only the department requesting the report." "Mr. Bales." "I'm sorry, I can't tell you that either." Since she was so pretty, Fergus smiled. "Can you tell me your name?" "Of course," she smiled back. "Mary Smith." Fergus left, following the blank wall that led to the exit, passing the wordless guards into the exterior daylight. Still, it was the only smile he had seen that day. It made him think of Mrs. Adam. He recalled her gravely composed face as she had talked to him, and wondered how it would look if she should smile. There was probably nothing in the world at this point in time that could make her do so. He wondered how long it would be before she might be able to smile again or laugh. The thought oppressed him. He wished he could have met her in some other way, at some other time. By mid-afternoon he had driven another 15 miles through downtown Washington and out the other side. He He parked the car in a tree-shaded lot next to a low, graceful white building set in a green park. Its roof was fanciful, resting on a circle of glass. It resembled a pagoda ready to fly away. The roof sheltered the world's largest collection of biomedical writings, the National Library of Medicine. If the Steinkopf treatment was described in medical literature, it should be here. Fergus could not have explained quite rationally his interest in the Steinkopf treatment. A hunch, perhaps. He had had such intuitions before and had learned to respect them. In Dr. Schutz's papers, the phrase was conspicuous not only by its irrelevance, but also by the fact that it was mentioned almost deliberately only in passing and only once. It would not attract attention, more than a fleeting question mark, of the reader whose interest was in germs, but Fergus had lost interest in the germs, as had, he suspected, Dr. Schutz. He went first to a domed room in the center of the building. From the ceiling, the apex of the dome, hung a multicolored spiral of beads that he knew instantly. It was a model based on a drawing he himself had made 3 years ago, a DNA molecule from the nucleus of a frog's egg, the first ever drawn from life rather than mathematical theory. It had been a breakthrough and had won him the 3-year grant that had in turn produced the bee virus experiment, still a month from publication, but already recognizable as a bigger breakthrough. The model, 2 feet in diameter, 15 feet long, depicted only part of the DNA molecule. A sign below it informed him that if reproduced in its entirety on this scale, the molecule would extend 142 miles. It might have added, but did not, that it would require approximately 30 million beads, each in precise symmetrical apposition to its neighbor bead in the next molecule. Alter a single bead and you had a new animal, a mutant monster unknown and unpredictable. In the seed of a multi-celled animal, such a change in the DNA would affect every individual cell. Below the dome, the room spread wide, its brightly muraled walls enclosed depressingly endless ranks of filing cabinets, a card index. A sign informed him that the cards referred not only to books, but to tracts, theses, tape recordings, and motion picture films. Fergus tried first the direct approach. He went to the cabinet labeled SORG SZYM, pulled out the drawer STEI-1, pushed it back, pulled a STEI-2, and scored a 0. There was no card bearing the name Steinkopf. That meant that there was nothing in the stacks, 3 acres of them in print or on tape, or by anyone called Steinkopf. Disappointing, also puzzling. How could there be a Steinkopf treatment without a Steinkopf? But not final. There was still the Index Medicus, and beyond that, the computers, the Medlar system. 10 years of Index Medicus, 40 volumes thick, occupied a bookcase of its own in the main reading room. Cumulated annually, it listed by author, subject, and title more than 2 million medical and biological articles from technical journals. But again, though there were papers aplenty listed under Steiner, Steinholtz, Steinkirk, and Steinmetz, no Steinkopf. All of this took perhaps 20 minutes and left him with Medlars, the world's largest computerized medical databank. The acronym stood for Medical Literature Analysis and Retrieval System. Connected to a high-speed printer, Medlars could spew out biological information at the rate of 3,600 words a minute. It was housed in the rear of the library in a soundproof, dustproof, vibration-proof room. A gray-green door bore a sign that said authorized personnel only. At a desk near the door sat a pale, studious-looking young man who read Colonel Attenborough's letter carefully and then shook hands. Dr. O'Neill, it is an honor. We know your work, of course. We process many inquiries about it. I myself am studying your endocrine enzyme program. You're a biologist. Biochemist. I have a 2-year internship here with Dr. Barclay. David Barclay, you're lucky. You can't do better than that. What's it on? Calcitonin. In what? So far in fish, the ultimbrachial glands, eventually in sheep, thyroid, I suspect. Give David my best wishes. We've met a few times. Are you working with the computer? Part-time. Today I handle demand searches. I gather that's what you have? A pretty vague one, I'm afraid, and Fergus explained, volunteering only the barest outline and studying a series of medical tracts. He had found references to a treatment identified only by name as Steinkampf. The papers were foreign, the author not available. He needed to know what the treatments were. Also, who was Steinkampf? You tried the Index Medicus? And the cod file. The young man looked doubtful. There's a possibility, he said, but generally all the proper names do go in the index. Still, we can try. He rose and led Fergus through the gray-green door to the computer room. Here, along the wall, joined part to part by cables, like hoses, stood medlars, a rank of dull gray metal boxes like heavy storage cabinets. In front of them, a machine resembling an oversized electric typewriter whirred faintly when he pressed the switch beside its console of keys. Above it, a square screen of gray glass flickered and came alight. From a box beside the console, a young man selected 3 punched cards. He placed these in a slot behind the keyboard. Then, seating himself on a stool, he typed on its keys the word Steinkampf, which appeared in illuminated letters on the screen. He pushed a green button marked Retrieve. There was a 5-second pause. Then, directly below Steinkampf appeared the words, No reference. The young man said, I'm sorry, there's nothing on Steinkampf. He pressed the key and the words were erased. But he left the console whirring and the screen lit. If you were to give me a little more information, another name, who published the papers that mentioned the treatment? They haven't been published. You're sure? Quite sure. Another approach. What was the treatment used for? Any specific disease? I don't know, Fergus said. In a way, that's what I'm looking for. Not even symptoms. We're programming symptoms. We haven't got it complete yet. But what we have is retrievable. There are associated symptoms, Fergus thought of laboratory subject RS-22. He said aloud, but as if talking to himself, loss of identity, morbid lack of anxiety, as in hypnosis, perhaps an induced euphoria. Why else would RS-22 have continued an experiment he knew was sure to cause his own agonizing death? Possibly, eventually, a suicidal tendency. The young man was expressing regret. All psychiatric, he said. Those symptoms are of a mental illness, surely. Yes, I suppose they are. I'm sorry, we haven't coded the psychiatric symptomology yet. He considered a minute, tapping his finger on the console. Another idea. Fergus was scarcely listening. He was thinking about RS-22. Of course, an induced mental state, a directed schizophrenia. Most of the research comes from Germany or Austria, the young man continued. We have papers in German? No. Wait, yes, originally they must have been. Schutz would have written in German. I read a translation. We might just try. The young man sat on the stool again. He typed at the keyboard and 2 words appeared on the screen. Headstone, Stonehead. Steinkampf might be translated either way, he said and pressed the green button. They watched the screen again, the 5-second wait. Under headstone appeared once more the words, no reference, but beneath Stonehead, the computer printed in small glowing letters, reference is Med Catalog 69-3159, Stonehead Village Community, Von Bulow H. You may, said the young man, have struck oil. And that is the end of chapter 12.